Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Wilson. I'm the director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. Behind me, you can see the building that's being built at the end of Tuck Mall that will be opening up in January. We're really excited about that. And because of that, we've made our theme for this term, Building Sustainable Resilient Future, Perspectives on Building and Energy. So all of the different events we'll be sponsoring, we'll be engaging with, are trying to have a building and energy theme. And I can't think of anybody better to be part of that beginning story here at Dartmouth than Rosi Kerr, who's been here for 11 years on campus and has been part of many Dartmouth energy stories. And so today she'll tell us where we are, where we're going. But I invite you all to put your question in the Q&A box. She'll be speaking for about half an hour, and then I'll come back and have a nice Q&A with us all. So with that, I'm going to turn my screen off. Rosie's going to share her screen, and I'll come back at the end and also share some events. So with that, Rosie, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here as always, and looking forward to hearing what the Dartmouth energy story is today.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to Irving Institute for Energy and Society for having me. I love this particular thing. I like it more when we can have pizza and all sit together in a room, but this is going to have to continue to do for now. And as anyone who's ever heard me talk before knows, I love a good opportunity to talk about Dartmouth sustainability and energy and buildings. In particular, working on sustainability, the built environment is a critical part of how we do or do not move towards a sustainable future. And so thinking about that on the Dartmouth context is something I do a lot of, and I'm happy to share where that thinking is now. Probably some of you have heard me talk before. I hope this won't be too redundant, and I'll be bringing some new perspectives. I wanted to start off just talking a little bit about Dartmouth as an energy system. I think about Dartmouth as a microcosm of kind of anywhere in the world. And that's both what makes it interesting to work on sustainability at Dartmouth and also what makes it challenging. We have all the same challenges that, Mumbai or Boston or San Francisco has, just on a different scale. And the solutions that we come up with here at Dartmouth are going to be uniquely related to where our microcosm, our little Dartmouth universe is situated, our region, our climate. We are a winter peaking or heating load dependent energy system. The energy environment we find ourselves in. We, for example, don't have a natural gas pipeline running through the way you would in Boston or San Francisco. So our energy infrastructure has evolved differently than it might in those places. Our mission as an institution, obviously our product, if you want to call it a product, is students who are going to go out and change the world and disproportionately have an impact in the world. Dartmouth students disproportionately have their hands on the levers that control resources. And our identity as an institution that was founded 250 years ago, and how that identity both is shaped by our region and our physical infrastructure, and also shapes our physical infrastructure. So this is kind of the context in which I work, right? And Elizabeth said, I've been here for 11 years. I've been involved in the energy discussion during that time. And by way of background, I came to Dartmouth. I'm a Dartmouth alum, but I came back to work at Dartmouth from the energy space. I went to graduate school and studied community-based energy systems at a very small scale in rural communities in Alaska. And then I worked in the energy industry in New York, one of the biggest energy markets in the world, working to use renewable energy to help large-scale commercial and industrial clients manage cost and risk, which was a fascinating education in the energy sector, mostly selling electricity and natural gas. And I was working on the renewable energy part of that portfolio. And then I worked for a company that helps commercial clients, in this case, colleges and universities, manage energy from the demand side. So we were helping colleges and universities reduce their energy footprint and work towards sustainability goals from the standpoint of how do they manage energy once they're on their campus. And that was mostly about the built environment. So this is something that I love to think about and talk about. And nationally, obviously, our buildings are a huge portion of our energy consumption. And a lot of how energy decisions are made is around supporting energy use in buildings, right? To keep us warm and cool and to keep the lights on and to power all the many things that are necessary for economies and individuals to function. So that's kind of the context within which I work. And as you know, as I've been here over 11 years, I've seen the energy conversation at Dartmouth morph and change. I have been through 5 complete changes of senior administration, each with its own approach to energy systems and sustainability. And a lot of what my role is at Dartmouth is to serve as an internal advocate, right? We like to say in the sustainability office that we're feisty, poor, and relatively powerless. And that is both an interesting challenge and a huge opportunity, because we have the opportunity to try to influence the conversation at Dartmouth and beyond. And we can sort of be agile about how we do that. And that conversation has moved from, what we do now. When I arrived at Dartmouth, we burned 5.5 million gallons of number 6 fuel oil, to burning something different, whether that was, we had a conversation about natural gas about 10 years ago or 8 or 9 years ago, through looking at other opportunities of different kinds of things we could burn, like woody biomass, to thinking about our distribution infrastructure, to thinking about how we use energy in buildings. So that conversation has morphed over time. I wanted to take a second to kind of pull back from this Dartmouth context to talk about the big picture. And right now is actually kind of an exciting, horrifying, but exciting time to work in sustainability, in part because it's on everyone's mind, right? I used to have to dig around when I gave these kinds of talks to find a relevant recent article about climate change and how it's impacting us. But now it's I don't have to look hard at all. I can look in today's paper. And I can find evidence that climate change is on everyone's mind and that it's impacting us on a daily basis. It's getting, really real for more real people, and it's getting more real fast. So that is both making my job easier, and also obviously it's making it feel much more urgent. I'm sort of a silver linings person. I tend to think that the urgency is good in the sense that it might motivate the kind of action that we need. And many of you may have followed the recent IPCC report that Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its 2021 report, which was a big update to their report. And this is a lot of words, but there were some really important takeaways. Just starting off with some facts and figures, the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is the highest it's been in 2 million years. And the last decade was hotter than any decade in 125,000 years. And sea levels are rising. And Arctic sea ice is at its lowest level in 1,000 years. Those are the kinds of things that were highlighted in the report. And the conclusions were that it's now indisputable that human activities are causing climate change. Those of you that have been following this for a while, none of this is new news. It was just more strongly said. And though carbon dioxide is bad, methane, something that we emit a lot of, is worse in the short term. We need to do all the things that we're considering to stay under 1.5 degrees C of warming, which is considered an acceptable level of warming, depending on who you talk to. All of these are sort of arbitrary human lines. And if we don't do a lot of things that are very intentional actions very quickly, we'll burn through our carbon budget in the next 13 years. Sea levels are likely to rise under every scenario. And our current emissions trajectories put us at 3 degrees C. So we have to change what we're doing if we want to avoid 3 degrees C is often considered the line for catastrophic climate change. If we want to avoid that, we've got to do stuff, right? And in my opinion, we've got to do all the things, not necessarily all the things, maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but many things to avoid that kind of scenario. So then how does energy connect with this? I had a really fun dive into the World Energy Outlook this week to try to understand how particularly COVID is impacting the World Energy Outlook. So this is the IEA's annual report, the International Energy Administration, and a couple key takeaways. The COVID-19 pandemic could be really good or really bad. And one thing that I like about that is we humans on the planet get to decide. It could be a catalyst that accelerates the pace of change towards a clean energy economy. So that's kind of what I'm driving towards. And if we're going to get to decarbonization, so the IEA in their World Energy Outlook, they established 4 scenarios. One scenario is the stated policy scenario, in which COVID-19 is gradually brought under control in 2021, and the global economy essentially returns to pre-crisis levels. And everybody does what they already said they're going to do, but nobody does anything different. They have a delayed recovery scenario where it's with the same policy assumptions as the stated policy scenario, but the pandemic goes longer than we think, and the global economy's return to pre-crisis levels is more slow. And it causes a low rate of energy demand, or sorry, a low rate of energy demand growth. And so that's another scenario that they looked at. They looked at the sustainable development scenario, in which the COVID-19 crisis catalyzes a surge in clean energy policies and investment and drives us towards sustainability objectives, and where all other assumptions are the same. And then they looked at a net zero emission by 2050 case where where nations change their goals and make them much more ambitious, and try to aim for net zero carbon emissions by 2050, or a significant proportion of nations does. And they essentially said, in order to get to these more sustainable scenarios, the sustainable development scenario and the net zero emissions scenario, careful long-term integrated planning is required. Electrification is required. Low carbon fuels are required. And it's going to be critical to engage humans, people, to ensure that we do this in an affordable way and that people accept it. And then a sentence that I kind of liked was, a structural transformation of the energy sector will require massive investment in new, more efficient and cleaner capital stock. So the lens that I look at this with is, okay, so what does that mean for Dartmouth? Zooming in on the United States, you may or may not have been following this large infrastructure bill that's working its way through the halls of power right now in various ways. And that that infrastructure bill includes some significant investment in energy. I put a picture over part of the words here, but essentially it says that it's going to aim to decarbonize the grid, a clean energy standard that really works to decarbonize the electricity grid. These are kind of the highlights that are in the infrastructure bill that are related to energy. A polluter fee that would tax high carbon imports, such as steel. Tax credits for power storage, for electricity storage, and for electric vehicles. A methane tax that's designed to reduce leakage. Civilian climate corps and solar power build-outs that are focused on low-income homeowners. But only 2% of this massive infrastructure bill that's debatably trillions of dollars is going to go towards the green transition, depending on how you look at it. That 2%, though, is 2% of a very big number. So this is going to have impacts nationally, and it's going to have impacts at Dartmouth as we think about what are we transitioning to. How is it going to impact Dartmouth? You know, as a tax-free institution, it's going to change. It might change regulation. For example, some kind of carbon fee might start to slowly work its way into the system, and we are a single point source emitter in New Hampshire. It will change what is available to us by driving innovation and increasing affordability in the markets of building technology, as well as transportation technology that's related to buildings, such as electric vehicles that need to be plugged in, for example. So there are some ways in which this infrastructure bill is going to affect Dartmouth. This is Dartmouth's current greenhouse gas emissions goals. So we had a greenhouse gas emissions goal we set in 2008. We updated that goal in 2017. So the 2008 target is in yellow here. Many of you have probably seen this before. The green line is our 2017 goal, and the blue line is our annual emissions to date. I think an open question is from a climate perspective, is this enough? Right? We tend to ask this question, what should our goal be, from the other way, institutions, not just Dartmouth. We tend to say, can we do this? What is attainable, right? I think an interesting question to try on, at least as an intellectual exercise, is what do we have to do from a scientific perspective, and then how do we work backwards? The green line on here, this goal was set based on the G7 goal at the time. In 2016, the G7 set a new carbon goal, and this goal was based on the G7 agreed upon goal. But it is an open question whether this is an ambitious enough goal and whether we need to accelerate our greenhouse gas emissions targets based on what I just told you is in the IPCC report, for example. A deeper look at our goals. We have a distribution efficiency goal. Right now we have a renewability goal. And we have a greenhouse, potentially most importantly, from a climate change perspective, we have a greenhouse gas emissions goal, which is a 50% reduction by 2025 and an 80% reduction by 2050. We're saying just wrapping our arms around how Dartmouth consumes energy has been no small task. And that is one that I think we've spent a lot of time working on over the last 10 years to really understand and get transparency into how do we use energy at Dartmouth and how do we make that much more visible. The team in the Dartmouth Engineering Department has done an incredible job of taking an antiquated system in terms of how we gather energy information and bringing that system into a state-of-the-art system that allows us to see into how we're consuming energy in buildings on a 15-minute interval basis. The challenge is that it's still difficult to get that information out into the world in a way that allows us to make decisions, because it takes a lot of human time to do that. And the Department of Engineering at Dartmouth has a lot on their plate, right? They've got to make the place run in addition to just looking at energy information. So this is a thing that we've put a lot of effort into, and it's one of those things that if you don't know where you are, it's hard to tell where you're going, or hard to measure how you're going to get to where you're going. So this has been a really important part of something we've done over the last 10 years and continue to work on. We're saying from a sustainability perspective, we're still trying to do this in many other areas. So do we have a sense for how much carbon emissions is produced by our scope 3 emissions, for example, transportation emissions or the emissions of Dartmouth's food supply chain? The answer to that is no. And from a carbon perspective, those things are probably pretty important. From a data management perspective, they're very difficult to assess. And they require a lot of human energy, a lot of human time to figure out, how many people are commuting to Dartmouth, in what vehicles, over what distance. How is airline travel happening at Dartmouth? Many people at Dartmouth purchase airline tickets when they go to a conference, for example, on kayak, as opposed to through any kind of centralized system. So wrapping your arms around scope 3 emissions and some of the other data that's important at Dartmouth is difficult. But as relates to buildings, energy is a very important metric. I just wanted to say, and this is like my plug for energy is cool and important. On a global basis, energy consumption, the ability to access affordable energy, relates to human welfare. That is the extent to which you have access to affordable energy, and electricity in particular, relates to how to human welfare indicators, because energy is critical to do all the things that we need to do in the world: keeping medicine cold, transporting goods to market, staying warm and dry, being able to do homework after it gets dark, etc. Running a medical system. So energy is really important. It's important at Dartmouth. It's important globally. We also waste a lot of it. So you guys have probably seen this in somebody else's energy talk. I certainly plug this all the time in mine. This is a Sankey diagram that shows US energy consumption. Our source fuels are on the left. How we use it is on the right. We waste most of the energy in our source fuels. Rejected energy is wasted energy. Some of that is very difficult to capture, because some of that waste is inextricably tied to use. For example, it's difficult to reduce resistance on car tires on roads. But some of it is easy to capture. And I think buildings are a huge opportunity. And this boils down to the microcosm of Dartmouth as well. So just a little look into how we use energy. Those of you that have heard me talk before have probably seen this. But we are a place-based system at Dartmouth, and we consume energy here now. We do it in two ways. We consume grid electricity, which we purchase just like you would for your house. Somewhere there's a generation asset that's burning something or running water through a dam, sending electricity into a transmission system, into a distribution system, and Dartmouth is buying it, and it's flowing onto campus in one of 3 substations that we have around campus. We also have a cogeneration system that provides most of our heat. So we have a large heating plant that's located in the middle of campus with a big smokestack. It's burning number 6 fuel oil in order to produce 2 things: steam to heat our campus and electricity. So we send the steam out to campus to heat our buildings through a series of pipes into radiators in buildings, and that's how we keep things warm. We cogenerate using back pressure turbines. I love this picture because, in 1896 or 1915 or whatever, Back pressure turbines and cogeneration were the future. Steam was super cool. And so that's why we use steam at Dartmouth, because it was really cool then. And we invested a lot of time and energy over time in this system, and it kind of slowly grew and evolved. But an interesting question is where do we want to go, right? If this is our system now, number 6 fuel oil arrives on trucks, we burn it, we make steam, we send that steam out as useful heat to buildings. It's about 55 to 65% efficient in terms of the energy and the source fuel. What could we be doing differently? This is a breakdown of our energy consumption. This is 2018, but it's pretty much the same now. A little bit more solar now, maybe a little bit more grid electricity. But about if you took all of our energy consumption at Dartmouth and you normalized it into MMBTUs, this is what the pie chart looks like. About 72% of our energy coming from number 6 fuel oil, and then on-roof solar and grid electricity. A really important part of this equation is to think about building efficiency. So on a national scale, building efficiency is critical for how we're going to move forward into a low carbon economy. And we have improved building efficiency at Dartmouth even as our square footage has grown. So our absolute energy consumption has declined even as our square footage has grown. And that's great. We've done that by doing things like fixing valves and sort of boring things. You know, we tend to think of buildings as these inanimate objects, but they're really not. They're more like a car. And a modern building is like a modern car. That is, it's computer controlled, and it needs to be tuned in order to run well. You wouldn't just get a car and run it, right? You would get a car and you would change the oil, and assuming that you had a combustion engine. And if you don't have a combustion engine, you would do updates, right, to your Tesla. So we need to do the same thing with buildings. And there's lots of places around Dartmouth campus where we have deferred maintenance, and we can and have improved efficiency by improving, fixing problems and tuning buildings over time. And that's iterative, right? We continue to need to tune buildings as they age. We've also replaced old buildings that were inefficient with new buildings that are more efficient. I'm about to replace this picture with a picture of the new Irving Institute for Energy and Society, which will be very, very efficient. And the buildings that these new buildings replace are often very inefficient, as is the case with this one, which is Life Sciences, which replaced the Gilman Biological Sciences building, which was very inefficient. So as we bring new building stock on, and we are willing and disciplined about focusing on how that building is going to run, we can improve the efficiency of our building stock overall. Another example of that is Dartmouth Hall, which is currently being renovated, where the building's efficiency, the building's comfort will improve. It will get air conditioning and a much better central heating system that's much more comfortable, and it also will be insulated, which it was not in the past. So every time we pull something apart, we have an opportunity to improve how it functions. Every time we replace a building, we have an opportunity to replace it with something better. But that takes real discipline. It takes real focus. When you're building a new building, it's really easy to value engineer the efficiency out of it. When you're doing a renovation, it's really easy to get rid of the unsexy things that you won't be able to see, like insulation, but that'll have really important impacts over time on that building's energy consumption. Some of you have probably seen this before as well, but I find this to be a helpful tool in looking at how we want to transition our energy system over time. So we went to Denmark to look at Denmark's district heating systems, we being a group of staff and administrators from Dartmouth College and a group of decision makers in the town of Hanover. And we went to Denmark because 97 or 98% of Denmark's buildings are heated from central heating systems. So each town might have a central heating system, much like Dartmouth, and all of the homes on that system all of the homes in that town are hooked up to that system. Nobody has a oil furnace in their basement, or very few people do. So this is how Dartmouth heats and cools, right? We have this central heating system, and we're trying to figure out how do we transition it from where it is now to a future state that is more agile, requires less energy, is radically more efficient, and uses renewable sources for fuel. So we are starting here over on the left side, where there is the red line representing a high temperature system, the blue line representing a relatively low efficiency system that's burning fossil fuel to produce steam and send that out. And then if you are in Denmark, you've moved from that over across to the right side of this page, where you have a district heating system that's using low temperature hot water instead of steam. Its energy efficiency is much better, and it's using a variety of source fuels to put that hot water into the system. So our kind of task here at Dartmouth is to move from left side to right side to figure out how to jump over all these in-between levels and go directly to the right side, or even fifth generation, what's happening next in Denmark, right? We paused on biomass, right? We thought about switching from what we burn now to switching to woody biomass. As you may or may not be aware, there was a lot of controversy around whether that was a good or a bad decision. Ultimately, there were two main things that led us away from that decision, or maybe three. One is the extent to which it caused sort of public outcry and angst and debate. Two is it would mean a big investment in a new source of combustion. And even though we viewed that as a bridge fuel, it would mean we were sinking an enormous amount of money into a thing that was going to burn stuff, regardless of whether you thought the stuff was good or bad, and emit carbon at the stack for a period of time. And once you've spent $50 or $60 million, you're going to keep doing that for 20 or 30 years. And then the third thing was the IPCC update, which included a lot of guidance on biomass and burning woody biomass. And it also, this is not the 2021 update, it was a 2018 update. And it also indicated that the next 5 or 10 years are especially critical in terms of net carbon in the atmosphere. And whatever you feel about woody biomass and its ability to sequester, wood's ability to sequester carbon over time, and the extent to which biomass is or is not a carbon neutral fuel, in the short term, you're burning something and putting smoke up a stack. So if you care about the 5 to 10 year horizon, whether the payback, whether carbon is sequestered over a 10 or 30 or 40 year time horizon in a woody biomass scenario is irrelevant, because you care about 5 or 10 years. So that's a kind of pause we took, and what would be described as third generation, potentially in Denmark. And now we're trying to figure out, what does fourth generation district heating look like? We have challenges to doing this. One of the challenges is that we have 5.5 million square feet of built infrastructure at Dartmouth. Probably getting close to 6 million square feet. And a lot of that infrastructure has old systems in it. And those old systems need to be replaced and upgraded in order to shift from what we're doing now to something better. Primarily, they need to be moved from a steam heating system to a hot water heating system, preferably a low temperature hot water system. Once we have a low temperature hot water system, we can inject all kinds of interesting heat sources into that system: geothermal heat sources, solar thermal heat sources. All kinds of things become possible. But we have to figure out how to transition this infrastructure. And that's probably a 10-year project with a lot of complexity. If you think about how complex any given building project is on the Dartmouth campus, how disruptive it can be maybe to your life in Hanover or on campus. And then you multiply that by all 6 million square feet, or a lot of it, which needs to get transitioned. It's not all 6 million, but say 4 million of it. It's a big project. All of our peers are doing similar things. This is Cornell's lake heating and cooling system, where they are basically are transitioning away from carbon-based combustion to some extent, although they still use an enormous amount of natural gas at Cornell. But they are using electricity to move water from Lake Onondaga into their heating and cooling system. So this is a great example of a place-based energy system. Cornell is located next to a large, deep lake with a solid thermocline, and they're able to pump water out of that lake and use it in their heating and cooling system. One of my questions is, what is the Dartmouth equivalent of this? What is a place-based energy system that we can run here that improves our resiliency and decreases the amount of carbon we emit? Obviously, step one of that is our steam distribution system. This is a picture I took with my cell phone maybe 2 Februaries ago, with a leaky steam line running across the green. So we are already doing that. You've seen that happen all around campus. We're replacing our steam system with a hot water distribution system, and slowly transitioning portions of our campus, for example, the west end where the new Irving building is, to hot water heating and cooling. And that, as I said, is a complex process. It means physically digging up pipe and putting in hot water pipe. Once you do that, that system is much more efficient. It's about a 25% efficiency improvement just to switch from steam to hot water. And it greatly expands the number of ways that you can inject heat into the system and the places you can inject heat into the system. We're also expanding our solar PV in terms of our electricity consumption. And this is an area that I'm starting to try to think about more proactively of how can Dartmouth transition our electricity supply to be more resilient, potentially more local, if that's part of our resiliency in an era of an aging grid. and more renewable, which may or may not be local. There's a lot of ways to buy renewable electricity. And this is an area where we have a lot of opportunity to expand what we're doing now and to think about this as a cost and risk mitigation strategy going forward, both operational risk and financial risk as we look at electricity markets. So the big question that I face all the time, and again, if you've seen me talk before, you've seen some version of this, is what does it mean to transition our our energy system? And what should the wedges of the pie be? Caveat, I made up these wedges. These are not Dartmouth's idea of what we're going to do in the future. But this is what I'm always playing with, right? I'm trying to give you some insight into how I'm thinking about how do I advise Dartmouth to move forward? What do I agitate around? What do I try to push us towards? What should those wedges of the pie be? And I don't have a perfect answer for you. And in fact, I hope the wedges of the pie will continue to shift over time. Like maybe hydrogen becomes part of this. Maybe batteries becomes part of this. And those wedges should slowly morph over time. Part of my role is to figure out how do I create a decision infrastructure that pushes us towards greener and greener wedges, right? If that's how you want to think about it. Lower and lower carbon wedges, while also managing for Dartmouth's mission, our identity, all the things I talked about at the beginning of this talk, managing for cost, managing for risk. But how audacious can we be at pushing towards greener wedges? And what we're driving towards is a more resilient energy system. So this is just like a wonky little engineering diagram of our energy system. But what I like about it is it reminds me that we want many things, right? We want many wedges, and we want the system to be more resilient over time. And I think in the past, one of the things that I have observed is that we have tended to get stuck on like what's one big solution, right? And now we're moving to this smaller wedges. So the answer to the question, where are we going, which is kind of in the subject of this talk or the title, if I get to pick, I pick the sustainable development scenario for Dartmouth, right? I pick deep carbonization, deep efficiency, a connection to world events and what science is telling us we have to do. Potentially Dartmouth leading the way towards this idea of stewardship of our place, this idea that we need to focus on real deal responsibility. That is, what can we do here that drives the conversation forward on a bigger global scale? That's kind of our special sauce, right? We're this little microcosm, potentially more enabled, more privileged than any other microcosm or than many other microcosms. And we have this possibility to say, what if we implemented the sustainable development scenario here and tried to demonstrate what could be done in the world, what it looks like to be really responsible for a place and to contribute to solutions in that way. And to me, that's as much about decision structures as it is about a given technology. So I think I'll stop there and stop sharing my screen. And we can.
Oh, thank you. That was so useful and so inspirational, especially at the beginning of the year as we're thinking about this. There's lots of questions that came in with the registration. There's also questions in the Q&A box. I invite our participants to submit the question in the Q&A box. We have until about 1:07, so about 15 minutes for Q&A.
Okay.
One of the questions that came in just to help ground us as we enter this conversation was somebody wanting to know Dartmouth's carbon footprint per capita and per meter squared or foot squared.
I don't know the number off the top of my head. I can tell you that we're at about 55,000 metric tons of carbon in our scope 1 and 2 emissions right now. But I don't have at the top of my head our per square foot or per human numbers. And actually worth saying, that sounds like a really simple number to have, and I should have it probably right on the tip of my tongue. And also it depends on how you define our square footage and our people. And those things have smooshier than you would think boundaries.
Yeah, students here on campus, students who are living on campus.
Staff and faculty,
Yeah.
is it Dartmouth Rentals as well as Dartmouth Owned? Now there's accounting guidelines for all of that. It's a surmountable problem, but it's not totally straightforward.
There are a couple questions in the chat about plans for Dartmouth to purchase carbon-free electricity. Phil, I just saw you raised your hand. Please put your Q&A in or your question in the Q&A box, and we'll be taking them that way. So does Dartmouth have any plans to purchase carbon-free electricity?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're working on the electricity side. And what that looks like is, we're in the process of understanding what a carbon-free electricity supply for Dartmouth could look like. Right now, what it probably looks like is a combination of on-roof solar, local solar, that is solar that's within, say, 2 miles of the Dartmouth campus, and then some sort of large-scale virtual power purchase agreement with either a wind or solar development, probably regionally, but potentially nationally, that where Dartmouth purchases some amount of power from a regional facility. There are other ways to go about decarbonizing our electricity. For example, Dartmouth could form a consortium with other local organizations and develop a renewable energy project somewhere that is not proximate to our campus, where it makes more sense to develop renewable energy. Right? It doesn't make sense to develop offshore wind at Dartmouth because we don't have any shore and we don't have a lot of wind. So we would have to do that elsewhere. But those are figuring out exactly what are the pieces of the electricity pie chart is very much on the table right now. We're already moving forward with some of those pieces. The rooftop solar percentage is growing very rapidly. We have talked about and looked at the feasibility of many local renewable energy projects, and we have talked about and looked at the feasibility of many VPPAs of various sizes, shapes, descriptions, flavors.
And one of the things that I've appreciated knowing you over the last 4 years that I've been here, much shorter than your 11 years, is that the aspects shaping decision-making around energy decisions in Dartmouth are very fluid, and they've changed over the administrations you've worked with. One of the questions here talked about how do you balance and assess a project's benefit cost analysis and ratio. And I remember you talking about how interest rate assumptions have really changed and discount rates over your time. And so I'm just wondering, from your experience, how is that evaluation happening?
Yeah, so we have tried to evaluate that in a variety of ways. There are some existing tools that help with cost benefit, scenarios and full life cycle costing of various energy options. We have also created our own tools. So one of the things that I was involved in now several years ago was creating this kind of decision matrix. Like, what are the things that matter to Dartmouth as we're assessing different options, and how do we evaluate different options in an organized way across a series of decision criteria for Dartmouth. And some of those criteria were quantitative, some of them were much more qualitative. And so we are I would say we're using a variety of tools to try to understand how to cost the different values, both carbon values, economic values, and also the more qualitative values that matter. For example, what is the impact on regional economy, or what is the impact on how Dartmouth is perceived in the world? Those might be things we care about. One of them is really hard to measure. How is Dartmouth perceived in the world, right? Is difficult to measure. But having a discussion around that is critically important. So, and I think that's kind of related to some of the other questions that I see in the chat, including how do we get more specific around the cost and benefit? How do we move from conceptual ideas to more specific?
Yeah, that was Charlie Sullivan. How do we move from conceptual wedges to specific assessments of how much each web can provide?
Yeah. And, to be honest, Charlie, I don't have a perfect answer for that, right? Because that's a very interesting and difficult question. And I think to some extent, if I think about like, what do I actually do in my job, right? I am an organizational change agent, right? That's kind of what I do. And so what I'm thinking about questions like that a lot. How do I move decision makers through the process of going from conceptually, this is a good idea, to we're actually going to do this thing? And how do I help them evaluate the relative cost and benefit of each thing? And, there are lots of parts of that are challenging. As I said, we've been through 5 changes of senior administration. Each administration arrives with a different idea about how they'd like to understand the cost and benefit of each potential scenario. And that's going to change again very soon, right? When we have a new provost, I report to the provost. So I'm constantly thinking about, okay, given this new landscape, how do we present the cost and benefit of each of these scenarios? So I guess, like, Charlie, if you can answer that question, we should talk, because that gets a lot of my job done, which is great. At the same time, I think we do have some very concrete tools, for example, that decision matrix, that help us move from theoretical to, like, actually, let's do this thing.
Several of the questions here that I want to bundle together talk about Dartmouth's energy impact on the community. I have one question on affordable housing and housing displacement. There's another question here about, from Tom Wilson, is Dartmouth doing anything to encourage student access to Upper Valley by train? For example, having a free shuttle for the last miles getting from Hanover to WRJ. There's another question about the Greek community and upgrading their aged and often poorly maintained frat houses. And I'm just wondering if you want to address those kind of together as we are here at the college, but our impacts and our energy footprint is community-wide, national, regional, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really important part of the picture. I think trying to understand, how do we connect in the Upper Valley? How do we think about our impacts in terms of the energy we consume, but also in terms of the policies we enact? You know, the transportation one, for example, is a potential opportunity for Dartmouth to be an advocate for a clear set of policies. I think what I would like to drive towards is a clear, strong sort of stated position on in many of these areas. And we kind of haven't gotten there yet. We haven't gotten to a clear, strong policy on transportation, or a clear, strong position, maybe not even a policy, but a position on transportation. Like, Dartmouth is supportive of expanding rail infrastructure, and Dartmouth, that will be expressed in the form of, we give vouchers to students who travel by train, or some other incentive program. So I think that trying to understand, if we are going to build a local,
there is support to the local bus system. So
yeah, and there are ways in which, that's a really important caveat. We do support many, many, many components of our local sustainable infrastructure, whether that be vital communities, or the, advanced transit, or so there are many ways in which we already, or, having a bike policy. There are many ways in which we incentivize people to behave differently. I think trying to organize that in a more, in a larger regional direction is a great ambition. And that's, I think, maybe where we have an opportunity to dig in a little bit more and have a really clear overarching policy.
There were a few questions on specific energy use in building, and the new Irving building that you see behind me will be LEED Platinum certified, hopefully. That's the objective they're shooting for now. But there was one discussion on dashboard for real-time energy consumption, what the pros and cons of that you see. Another, the leveraging smart building technology in conjunction with building automation systems. Another person was curious about the water that would be used in the hot water systems for the district.
Sure, I think your EUI in the Irving building is at like 20. We at 21 MMBTUs per square foot, which is, a very impressive energy use intensity in the new building. And by contrast, Dartmouth's overall EUI is something like 128 MMBTUs per square foot. So, and the life sciences building is at about 100, which is good for a lab building built now 10, 12 years ago. But, we have a long way to go in our overall EUI, and the Irving Institute, as new square footage with very low EUI, will help with that, especially as we decommission older, less efficient square footage. Questions regarding automated smart building technology and an automated dashboard. So I would say, yes, we are already using smart building technology. Buildings like the Irving building are employing smart building technology throughout the building, and it's part of what helps it achieve that very ambitious energy use intensity. I think the challenge is we have varying ages of infrastructure all around the campus. So, Mass Row is a dormitory that hasn't been renovated in, I don't even know how many years, right? And its energy infrastructure, there is nothing smart about how that building functions in terms of its energy infrastructure, because it's an old building with old infrastructure.
Every year the students will talk about how when it's hot in the winter, they open the windows.
Yeah, right. That happens all around campus. And I can, I can get a lot of nods in a room full of students by saying, how many of you guys have to open your windows, or how many of you guys listen to that like ka-clang, ka-clang, ka-clang in the middle of the night, or have a non-functional little valvey thing on your radiator.
And what I appreciate is when I'm in a meeting with the 78s, they talk about the same problems on campus. So.
I am now getting to be an aged alum, and the same thing was happening when I was a student. So, so we have this challenge of these layers of infrastructure, and what that comes down to is like, how much money do you want to spend, how fast, at what level of disruption, right? Like, would I love to snap my fingers and make all the buildings smart and automated right now? Sure, but that's not how it works under the constraints of physics and finance. So, so yes, we are employing smart automation in many buildings, but not in all buildings. And bringing those old buildings, into the modern era is a big task. And do we have visibility into our energy system? Is there a dashboard? No. And the reason that there is not a publicly available dashboard is that it is expensive and time consuming to build. And so far, we have chosen to spend our resources on improving the efficiency of buildings rather than building that dashboard. And this has been a big debate. We have talked a lot about, should we have a real-time dashboard that the public can access? It's difficult, it takes people, and it takes a fair amount of money and time to make that thing happen because of all of these interplaying systems, the Johnson control system in one building that was built in 1974, the Honeywell system in another building, the Rockwell system that overlays it all, blah, blah, blah. Won't bore you with the details. But
I appreciate the challenges, and I appreciate that at Minnesota we had one of those, and people looked at it at first, but then people stopped.
Well, so that's
the point that you've made before about how.
Yeah. The other point is, like, you guys are awesome. The audience of this call, you're fantastic, and you're all interested in energy. And there's, there were 55 of you at the peak of this call, right? And so, while there are probably 100 people a year who would look at that dashboard, if it costs us $50,000 or $75,000 to build, and $15,000 a year to maintain, is it worth doing that to serve the interest of 100 people? You sort of get into that.
Some questions from students, and then I want to make sure that Hannah Van Wingarden asks, what are some ways undergrads, those actively involved in the environment, as well as those that aren't, will be involved in helping Dartmouth meet its future energy consumption goals?
I think so. One of the ways that students are involved is learning about and understand and engaging in the conversation around the energy system. So there are plenty of students at Dartmouth who have never thought about energy systems, who have never thought about what keeps their buildings warm and dry, and who are not particularly interested in energy. I think they will sort of involuntarily participate in that the heating and cooling of their buildings is going to change. And renewable energy is going to be more and more visible around the campus, and they will see that. And when they elect to come to Dartmouth, they will be electing to come to a place that is continuing to evolve its energy system. And in that way, they will participate voluntarily or involuntarily. We have ambition to make energy more and more visible around the campus. And so they will see it in the ways in which we make it more visible, whether that's through displays or whether that's through things like more visible solar. So in terms of actively engaging in energy education, what we're trying to do is say, hey, what do you already care about? Student that's interested in anthropology, or student that's interested in economics, or student that's interested in history. And how do we get you engaged in energy based on what you're already interested in? And there, I think we can get more people to think about energy systems in new ways by sort of tackling it through the lens of what they already care about. I just wanted, Stephanie, can you save all the questions that are in the chat? Because I would like to answer these at greater length. Many of these are great, and we probably won't get to them all.
And I wanted to give a question that we could actually both answer together before we kind of wrap up. And this was one from Tom Wilson. Are there any integrated cross-discipline scholarship research programs integrating engineering, architecture, government, business, medical, comfort, and health issues with a focus on our energy carbon future? So I'll let you talk about the sustainability activities that you guys have going on and all your activities with students, and I'll tell a little about the Irving if I could.
Yeah, of course. So I think, and Irving is the obvious answer to this, like a lot of what Elizabeth and Amanda are trying to carve out is these kinds of things, cross-disciplinary scholarship and research programs that integrate many disciplines to focus on energy and the carbon future. I think that's kind of like right your sweet spot. The ways that we in sustainability are doing this is we run a big first year program. We run a big internship program. We don't do research, we do action, right? Because we're a co-curricular and extracurricular component of the college's learning landscape. So what we are trying to do is give students opportunities to understand and work on these systems as part of their experience at Dartmouth, their co-curricular and extracurricular learning. We also support things like engineering classes that are using Dartmouth as a kind of teaching landscape or learning landscape. The campus as living lab concept. And there, I think we're really trying to build that out. We're going to move down towards there into the new Irving Institute building, and we're going to be the bottom right there behind Elizabeth. There we go, right there. And I think that proximity to Thayer is going to give us an opportunity to work hard on this question of how can we make the campus system more available to people that are working on the energy and carbon future and want to kind of get their hands dirty here. So that's how we do it.
I really appreciate having you as a partner. And this lunch series is actually part of the Dartmouth Energy Collaborative, which is the Irving Institute for Energy and Society, the Sustainability Office, and the Rever Center for Energy at Tuck, which you can see right next to us. When we move into this new building, it really is bringing all of that together. And April Salas at Tuck will also be occupying this new building. So we're trying to make this space for these interdisciplinary energy, scholarship, research, and engagement conversations, and a location to really touch on this. And what I've appreciated is no matter what your interest is, no matter what your field of study is, energy impacts your life. And I've appreciated that this generation of students coming in have been learning about climate change, have been learning about the threats to the environment, have been living this world since they were in second grade, and that they need a space where they can talk about actually building different scenarios and different solutions going forward. And that's our job at the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. It's giving people a place to build this future, to get the tools and the training to go out into the world and actually make a difference in the space that's so critical for all of us. So our research themes are two. One is critical infrastructures in a carbon changing world, in a climate changing world. And the second, energy justice and equity, because building an energy system that doesn't address the societal needs of the most vulnerable people on the planet misses the point. And so we're really looking forward to engaging with people from all walks of life and all interests in this endeavor when we move into our new space. So thank you for those conversations, because I really do believe that the conversation here at Dartmouth, our infrastructure gives us a basis for this conversation, but where we go from there is much larger than Dartmouth or the Upper Valley and engages students, alumni, colleagues all over the world. So thank you very much. And to that end, we have an arc of events that are happening this term. Rosi, thank you so much as always for being a super guest on
Pleasure.
Dartmouth Energy Collaborative and really grounding us in these conversations. And thank you for addressing the questions that remain unanswered. And we have a series of events where we're looking at our new energy series. We're bringing in assistant professors, postdocs, and researchers next Wednesday. Daniel Muller-Sninum, who was a postdoc here at Dartmouth, will be talking about flexible and integrated energy systems, finding and addressing the barriers, really interested in district heating and cooling and understanding what some of those barriers are for implementation, because it can be so important. Rosi mentioned that 40% of energy use happens in buildings. The other campus's approach to sustainable building will be the next Dartmouth Energy Collaborative. We told you where Dartmouth is today. After this, we're taking it to other schools so we can see what our peers are doing and how they're thinking about things differently. And then another part of the new energy series, Danae Hernandez-Cortez from Arizona State University, through environmental markets cause environmental injustice, evidence from California's carbon market. And so looking at some of those trade market approaches and assessing some of the societal implications. We have a host of events over the entire season, and we look forward to seeing you at some of them. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Rosi, for being part of this conversation. It's always great to see you.
It's my pleasure. It's really fun. I'll be back in 2 weeks after Daniel. And if any of those, if Stephanie, if you could copy those questions, if any of those people want to follow up, I'll try to get them answers to their questions, or set up another question session. Maybe we could do that. Just set up a question session where they can just fire questions at me.
Super. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks all.